I thought we'd just go through a couple of really simple things today, because I find this concept of advanced is an interesting one. Often people think that means more complicated or more techniques, or I've got to do something better than, or something like that. And I find that if I'm watching a craftsman at work, they do simple things consistently well. They don't do complicated things. If you watch a craftsman making a piece of furniture, he knows how to use a chisel. I mean, that just seems so simple, but you just have a real solid understanding of the basic principles of the characteristics and the materials and the tools they're working with, and they don't do anything fancy. But from that, they produce incredible results, because, of course, what they are is an element in a system which is influencing that system and allowing that system to take on some kind of shape. And when we're working with clients in whatever capacity that is, we are an active part of that system, but we're working with materials that are going to be unpredictable. So, you said about maintaining that centeredness and focus through a coaching session. I guess one of the things that stops that is that the client is inherently unpredictable and not knowing what direction they're going to take the conversation in. And how do you keep on track? And then whose track are you on? Are you on yours or theirs, or are they the same thing? So yeah, it's an important question, I think. But I wanted to start off with something that's very, very, it's so basic and so simple that I think it's generally overlooked in coaching. And that is that somebody will get into a coaching conversation or a coaching relationship because they want something. So you came here today because you want something. And if we just think about what that means in terms of the language and the concepts behind it, in order for somebody to want something, it must logically follow that what?
They need it.
They haven't got it at the moment.
They haven't got it at the moment. So for somebody to want something, it must logically follow that they don't currently have it.
Or they don't think they have it.
Or they don't think they have it. So in their awareness, in their map of the world, they don't currently have it. So that's the first thing that's obvious. Then the fact that they are talking to you means what?
They believe they can fill that gap for them.
Yeah, they believe that they can't get it by themselves. So the fact that they believe they cannot get it by themselves, and they believe that you will be instrumental in helping them to get that, is what defines you in that interaction as a coach. Now if they assign value to that interaction, now that makes you a what?
Successful coach.
A successful coach, yes. A commercially successful coach, yes. So it's easy to get into a position where we can talk to people about what we want and we can be instrumental in helping them get it. But actually then there's another step, which is they've got to assign value to that interaction. And when they do, they pay you money for your time, and that's how you make a living as a coach, fundamentally. Somebody pays you, so for example, what you're talking about, there are very common government schemes where the government or some agency acting on behalf of them pays you in return for you giving your time and expertise to help somebody to get back into work, for example. Or somebody might come along and pay for that independently because they perceive some value in it. So we don't question paying a plumber or an electrician who comes to the house and does some work. We might say, that seems expensive, I don't know what you did for that, but all you did was flick a switch or whatever. But the point is that we understand that that's a commercial transaction from the start. You may have people who try it on from time to time and and try and get out of paying, but fundamentally they still understand that that is a commercial relationship that they're entering into. So, and I think there's an obvious, that's the obvious thing that a lot of people kind of skip over in coaching and trying to get to the complicated stuff, is the fact that for somebody to want something means they don't currently have it. So let's see how that works in practice, shall we? So, bearing in mind that I'm videoing this, and I'll cut bits up and put them onto YouTube at some point, could I have somebody just help me with a quick demo?
Well, I don't mind. Oh,
all right.
Unless you want to go.
Go on.
Hello, Tatiana.
Hi.
So, just by way of exploring what you want, and you might choose what you want from today, or you might choose something else. Either way is fine. I'm just going to ask you 4 questions.
Okay.
Very simple, and let's just see what happens. Just to keep this to the absolute basics of that underlying principle of coaching. So, what do you want? Seems like even that was a difficult question.
Yeah,
But let's
I know
start
what I want.
So, what is it that you want?
I want to find the right balance between work and a family.
Okay. And how do you know that you don't have that now?
Because I keep getting frustrated. Because I'm not perfectionist, but I want to do if when I'm working with people, and equally, and I find satisfaction and feeling that actually that my intellect has been used for a change, and and at the same time I'm sort of obsessed with having my children having good family life and good quality of life, and to support them through their journeys and everything else. And it's always like, whenever you have a training course, there's something, family commitments there, who is gonna do children, and it's finding that balance, which I'm constantly trying to balance this, and I'm not sure, how to, presumably sort of my own head, in terms of, what is the right balance, what is it for me.
Okay.
So obviously can't get it all.
And in terms of that balance, what stops you from having that now?
Or if you're putting it on YouTube, but it's my work. If you're not putting it on YouTube, it's my children.
And what would happen if you had it now?
I'd get less frustrated.
Okay.
Less conflicted.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Hold on for a moment. So just 4 simple questions, and what a lot of information she gave us, and the most information came out when?
The second one.
Yeah, what's stopping you from...
Yeah, the second one was, how do you know you don't have it now?
Oh yeah, that one, yeah.
Yeah, and that's when she talked the most. What does that tell us?
But she's thinking a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
So she must be recognising within herself, to me anyway, what she needs to do. She must have the answer in herself. Because she's saying what exactly the problem is. So if you know that's exactly what the problem is, you know how to put in place some sort of move to solve it or to move out of it.
Mm. And what did you notice about the last answer, the answer to the question, what would happen if you had it now? Then she said, I would be less, what was it, I'd be less frustrated?
Conflicted.
Less conflicted, something like that. What do you notice about that answer?
Shorter.
Short.
Yeah.
It's negative, there's no positive in there.
It brought us full circle, didn't it?
Yeah.
It brought us full circle right back to the beginning again. So that's interesting. Because of course Tatiana's describing something that isn't happening once. And so the question, what would happen if you had it now, just brought us straight back to the beginning again. Do you ever feel with a client that you're going around in circles? So I tell you what we'll do is just to start with, by way of contrast, because our senses work by detecting contrast. So fundamentally every awareness that we have about the world is built on contrast and difference. And so if I say, right, this is the way you've got to coach, you've got to ask these questions, go and do that, then you don't know why you're doing it. You don't know what the purpose of it is. You don't integrate that into your own experience. Whereas if I say, here's 2 different ways of doing something, and you have an experience of both, and you have a sensory experience of both, you'll make comparisons between the differences, and you will figure out which one you prefer and which one integrates best with with your past experiences. So we'll learn by contrast. So let's start by setting a benchmark. So, and I'll get you to work in pairs and just do exactly what I did. So yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you, Tatiana. So if I just give you the 4 questions that I asked, just to help you remember them. The first one was simply, what do you want? The second was, how do you know you don't have it? The third is, what stops you having it now? And the fourth is, what would happen if you had it now?
What stops you from?
What stops you having it now? So, simple questions, based on the premise, the simple observation that if somebody wants something, they don't have it, and therefore if they don't have it, there must be something stopping them from getting it. So there's a conflict there between something that you want that moves you forward and something that's holding you back as well.
Yeah.
And we all have that. And what we do is we edge forwards. And if you think, if you watch these nature documentaries, you'll see animals come out their little holes and they'll edge towards the watering hole. And if they get any sign of a predator, they'll quickly run back and then they'll kind of edge out again. And we do this in our lives. We edge towards the shops, or we edge towards the new job, or we edge towards being self-employed, or we edge towards whatever thing we want to do that takes us out of the comfort zone. And the comfort zone is the safety of the social network, the safety of the people that we've surrounded ourselves with, and we create this system that now depends on us to be a certain way. So we create systems of work and families and people around us who expect us to act a certain way. Have any of you ever been on a time management course at work? Yeah? And you learnt a bunch of new fantastic things and little mnemonics and little tricks to manage your time. When you got back to your desk after the course, as let's say the next morning, how long did all of those time management tools last?
Until I met everybody else who wasn't doing it. In all honesty.
Yeah, like about 5 minutes normally, before it's all gone.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is, what you haven't fundamentally changed is the system that you've created that causes you to prioritise things in a certain way. So what we all do is, at work, we create certain systems of working, and we educate the people around us in those systems, and then we don't like it when they interact with us according to the rules that we've created, because now that's taken the control out of our hands. And so what we have to do, if we're going to help somebody to make any kind of change, even if it's learning time management tools, is they've got to go back and tell the other people in that system that something has changed. You've got to treat me differently because I'm no longer going to do this thing that I did before. So for example, if someone's going on a diet, then the people around them have to learn not to be buying crisps and chocolate bars and stuff like that, or putting pressure on them to have fish and chips for tea on a Friday night or something like that. And so we've got to create systems that support the change. Otherwise, the system that we've created ourselves to give us a sense of security and safety will prevent us from making change. Because whenever we make any kind of change in our lives, we're always fighting against the system that we created. Nobody else did that. Hence to your point on how you're doing this to yourself, and your point on being at cause or having agency in that. We are, even if somebody believes that they are the actor in a scenario, unless they change everyone else's script, they're still not going to get that scene to play out any differently. But for this purpose then, what it seems, a common theme that seems to be coming out is that what stops you having it now seem to draw your awareness to the fact that actually it's something about you or something that you are doing. Is that awareness in itself enough for that person to then say, oh okay, now I know what to do, and they'll go off and do it?
awareness
No.
is just a starting point, but it's not gonna, just awareness itself, not gonna get the results.
So how do we convert the awareness into action?
We have to get them to see what they would do differently. So, get them to face the obstacle and get them to plot how they could work around it, how they could overcome it. Get them to almost visualise this new system that the edging that you talked about, so that they can, if they can visualise it and feel what it will be like, that they're more likely to work towards that. Makes sense?
Create all these new behaviors and habits that will then give different results.
Okay. Sounds so easy when we talk about it like that, doesn't it? Sounds so straightforward. All right. Stuart, can I borrow you for a second? So let's take it a step further then. So based on what you just said there, in the previous exercise, what was it that you determined was stopping you from having what you want?
Focus and dedication, willingness to do what it is that I want to do.
So focus and dedication is what stops you?
No, it's not, is it? It's the commitment, I guess, the commitment to do what it is that I want to do.
So having the commitment to do what you want to do is what stops you?
Not having the commitment.
What stops you is not having the commitment to do what you want to do?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we just take that last point there and we say, okay, so you've got that awareness, and all we've got to do is get the client to come up with some actions or steps that are going to take them where? To what? What was it that you wanted?
To develop a marketing strategy for my coaching business.
To develop a marketing strategy for your coaching business. Okay, so can you put in place some steps that take you from not having the commitment to having the marketing strategy?
Yeah.
Can you think of one? Can you name one?
Yeah.
Out loud?
Sit down, allocate, yeah. Sorry, out loud. Yeah, I have. Thanks, Peter. That was yeah.
My work is done.
Allocate 30 minutes of brain dumping on a piece of paper, all the ideas that I've got as regards putting together a marketing strategy.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds nice and practical. Off you go. Go and do that. We'll come back. We'll review that next time. See how you got on with it. Nice, very nice, lovely. But my work as a coach is done. Everything's great. You know, he's got an action. Tick the box. He's got an action. I can review it with him. Sounds great. And again, we're back to a fundamental principle here, a fundamental observation. If it was that easy, why has he not already done it? So in the position that he's in now, anything that he thinks of that would be a step towards that goal is something that he could have done already, but hasn't. What has stopped you until now from setting aside that half hour to come up with some ideas for that marketing plan?
Laziness, in a way.
And now we're full circle again. It's not my fault. I can't help it. It's just the way I am.
Other things that get in the
It's just
way.
laziness. Other things got in the way. So we're back to, it's the system I created. It's outside of me. I'm helpless. I'm just lazy. I can't help it.
Which is a fear of
Well, we don't know. It's interesting that it was you that mentioned fear, or recognising that actually some fear is at the heart of it. So that's good. Excellent. So how are we doing? Right. Okay. So let's try that. Let's move on to that second stage then. So based on what you've got right now with the person that you worked with in the previous exercise, we'll take it a step further, which is, can you come up with some steps, or at least one step, one action that will take you from where you are to what you want? And then the simple question is, what stopped you from doing that? You know, it sounds easy. What has stopped you from doing that before now? So, so if we learn on our basic coaching training that we, you know, once we've identified the goal, we ask the client to come up with some steps to get there. It's easy. They can come up with the steps, but then what happens is they come back to the next coaching session. You say, "How did you get on with those actions?" And they say, "Oh, I was too busy." Or actually I decided that wasn't the right thing to do, or I did something else instead, or they'll come up with a list of reasons as to why they're a good person for not having done the things that they said they were going to do. And as a coach, how do you deal with that? Do you just go through that loop again, set some more actions, try and set some simpler actions?
Yeah, smaller steps.
And the setting of the actions, I would propose to you, is not the critical point, is not the issue, because if the actions are that easy to come up with, then there was nothing stopping them from coming up with those actions before now. So why wait until they're having this conversation with you to come up with those actions?
Because then they have to justify what they're not doing already, so there's no any actual actions, it's justifications.
Yeah.
What limits them.
So what really, in that conversation, what causes them to come up with those actions or next steps?
Excuses. I think you're not looking at an excuse for not having done something.
That might be why they haven't done it.
Mm-hmm.
But think more obviously, what is it that in that conversation causes them to generate some actions or next steps?
Please the coach.
Yeah, because you've asked them. Because that's what you asked them to do and they did it. It doesn't mean that they're going to commit to it. But, you know, if it's like if you go down to B&Q on a Sunday morning, you'll see people there going, "Oh yeah, we're just going to have that and we'll put one of those up," and then, "Oh yeah," and you know, the wife says to the bloke, "Well, you know, can you do it? Can you put? Oh yeah, that's easy. But you know, just you put that in there and then just buy one of these and yeah, just nail that on," and you know, and then they get it home and then they find that the reality of putting up a shelf is quite different to what they imagined it would be, because we can all look at the end result of something and say, "Yeah, I understand how this conservatory. I could put up a conservatory. I reckon. I go and buy one off eBay and I can put that up myself." Yeah, but then actually doing it, we find that there's a number of things involved in its construction that we never could have known because we haven't had that primary experience. So we face a reality which is, in order to get to where we've never been before, it always means what?
To do things different.
Yeah, we have to do things we haven't done before. So for example, for you, Stuart, well, you're talking about marketing plan, and the marketing plan's purpose is to get you what, ultimately?
More clients.
More clients. And more clients would get you what, ultimately? So what is the ultimate aim?
More successful business.
More successful business.
Or
You mean
a successful
you mean a
business.
success?
Yeah, yeah.
You mean a coaching business? You mean to be self-employed?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. Okay, we got there in the end. So if the ultimate aim is to be self-employed,
Yeah.
then there are steps that you can see from where you are now that get you there. But until you take those steps, you wouldn't. Have you ever been self-employed?
No.
So you'll never really know what it's like until you're there. And there's lots of techniques. We could do timelines and all sorts of stuff to get you to imagine being there. But until, you know, you're standing there in your backyard with a bunch of bits out of the conservatory kit thinking, now what? What do I do with all this stuff? It's difficult to formulate steps that you can feel safe and confident in, at least as safe and confident as you feel now with your dependable day job. And one of the things I noticed that you were doing on the practitioner training, for example, in order to try and give yourself that push, was to create an illusion whereby the day job is less dependable. So if I feel that my job is at risk, then maybe that will give me the push that I need. And of course it still doesn't help. So we do all kinds of things to try and get us to take that leap, but it's always a leap of faith, because fundamentally we do not know what's involved really in getting there because from where we stand now in the present, there are things in the future that we can never see. So the client will always face that barrier. If they want to make anything more than a superficial change in their life, they will always face the issue that they can't actually see how to get there. So some of you will have heard me say before that the research around goal setting is, back in the heyday of NLP, trainers used to get, or coaches used to get people to imagine their goal and then make it big and bright and colourful and put flashing lights on it and, heavenly music and make it amazing and compelling. But actually the evidence is that that's counterproductive for two reasons. Firstly, when we make a goal that exciting to look at, we get an emotional payback which actually reduces our motivation to take action to get it. Because we feel good just thinking about it, I don't have to take action to get it. Second problem is, if we create a goal that's so far away from where we are right now, then we can't figure out the steps to get there, and then that actually becomes demotivating. Because, if you imagine standing in your backyard and this conservatory kit from eBay has arrived, and it's in bits in your backyard, and you're just thinking, I don't even know where to start. And that's what it's like when we create that big dream. But standing in B&Q, it's easy to say, I could do that. And so you will no doubt have in your house unfinished projects, things that you started and didn't finish because actually you gave up halfway through, or halfway through you got to the point where you got what you wanted out of it, and therefore what was the point in doing anymore? Case in point being, I haven't quite got round to finishing off the removal of the patio doors, because now that we have one big room, this is now just an extra bit of work that is unnecessary to the purpose of the original exercise. And what I'd start off doing always is I think, we'll take these patio doors out, we'll have a nice big room, be great, I'll do that, I can do that. So take the first window out and then think,
The tension in the room is just going.
I'm not sure I can.
Where that's coming from.
I don't know about this. And so my approach is to start it and then get to the point very quickly where I think, well, I'd better carry on now because I'll look stupid if I don't. If I stop, it's in a worse case if I just hop. It's in a worse position if I just hop halfway through, and then I've got no choice but to do it all, almost all. I have to leave a little bit. Maybe subconsciously, if I leave a little bit, it looks like I've done something. Whereas if it was all perfect, you'd walk in and you would never know that it was 2 rooms, and you would never think to say, "Oh, have you changed this? This looks nice." So there's all kinds of things going on, but ultimately, as you've all identified already, yes, what stops you from getting to where you want is yourself, but it's a bit more complicated than that. It's not just a matter of having more confidence or more self-belief or more what do people say that they need more of in order for them to have what they want out of life?
Time,
Yeah.
confidence, skills.
Yeah.
Resources.
Yeah.
All of those are resources.
And we're back to square one, all things that you don't have. So if only I had this thing that I don't have, then I would have what I don't have. And we're back to the circular argument again. So it's like, imagine you tie a rock to a piece of string and you're twirling it around your head. That's just going to keep on going around in circles. Until what? What have we got to change?
Let go of the string, put it down, the string breaks.
Yeah, the string breaks, we let go of the string, and often in life we continue to go around in circles until the string breaks or the rock falls off. But actually, if as coaches what we can do is get people to let go of the string earlier, and they move forward a bit. And they go and pick it up and twirl it again, and then they let go of the string at some point and they move a bit further forward. And we take these steps forward because we put all of this energy into going around in circles. And if that energy was actually taking us in a straight line, then we'd probably have achieved the things that we want, that we say we want, a long time ago. And then that creates a problem. What's the problem that creates?
system not changed yet?
Yes, but just the idea that if this thing wasn't holding me back, then I could have had everything I wanted years ago. What problem does that create?
It will create new limiting beliefs for them, that if I could have had something and I don't have it, then they'll come up with other things to justify it.
Yes. Yeah.
About regret.
Yeah.
Oh, I should have done this years ago.
Yeah.
Regret, guilt, shame, any of those kind of
Self-fulfilling
emotions. That would,
fantasy.
Yeah, because if you could have had it years ago, if you could have been a self-employed, whatever, self-employed in any capacity, years ago, then the only plausible reason as to why you haven't already done it must be what?
You don't really want it.
Or,
Capable.
It's unrealistic.
yeah, it's unrealistic, he's not capable of it. So, if the more that people try to convince you that you can do it, the more the gap widens. Because if you can do it, then you must have been able to do it all along. How does it feel to know that you've been struggling with something that you could have done all along?
Very demeaning.
Yeah, it might make you feel stupid.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're pulling a door that clearly says push. And then, you know, if there's other people watching you, you pretend that it was sticking, so you might open it a couple of times and look at the edge and go, oh, something wrong with this door. I think it's just catching a bit on the thing. Oh, I'll have a look at that later. When in reality, you know, so we've all done stuff like that. And then what we do is, if there's other people watching, we'll do things to what?
Cover our embarrassment.
Yeah, yeah. So if you ever worked in an office and you see somebody walking down the office and they get halfway to where they're supposed to be going and they forget something, they don't just turn around and go back to their desk. They have to put on a little performance when they turn around, don't they? What do? They go, oh, jeez. Because they think other people are watching at them saying, oh, he's walked halfway to a meeting room and turned around and gone back again. Anyway. Like anybody cares. So they think that anybody's even interested in them enough that they have to put on a performance to cover their embarrassment. So we've got that as well to get across. So before we take a tea break, Stuart, can I have you back again, please? So you had an ultimate aim, which is self-employed as a coach, maybe, and we know that the current situation is that that's not where you are right now. And you came up with a step or some actions. You got this marketing plan. You're setting aside half an hour and you know some other stuff that's going to help you to get there. And we already identified that actually you could have set aside that half an hour up until now. And when I asked you what had stopped you, you said laziness or something along those lines. So how do you explain the fact that you could have been self-employed many years ago, but didn't make that choice?
I didn't make that choice.
Because I'm guessing this isn't the first time you've thought about being
No,
self-employed.
it's not.
So if this is something that occurred to you in the past, and you didn't achieve it then, then how do you explain that?
I guess it was the fear of not having things associated with employment, so the securities, regular income, and having responsibilities, dependencies. I felt maybe at the time it was too risky.
What was the earliest point that you can remember that you considered becoming self-employed?
At 18, 19.
Age?
Yeah.
What responsibilities and dependencies did you have then?
the only real responsibility really was like looking ahead, a lot of pressure about buying properties. I was moving into employment, so I was deciding what I was doing. Actually, no, I was in employment, so I was already employed at that time, had a job, regular income, and had the possibility of kind of moving into web design with a friend of mine, and we actually sat in a bank with a bank manager and went through a plan assumptions. It was too risky, even then. Not enough assurances for me, I guess, of having an income from that business, even though it was exciting and like it all is now, I guess. Yeah.
What does this tell us?
Kind of risks, fear of unknown.
Yeah, so the first thing I asked was what stopped him from becoming self-employed up until now, and he said it's dependencies and security and regular income. And now we find that is in fact a what? A red herring. It's not true. It's not has nothing to do, because if I ask him about the earliest time he thought about becoming self-employed, he didn't have all of those things, and yet he still didn't do it. So we know by a process of cross-referencing, we know that can't be true. It may add some weight to the decision, but it can't be fundamentally the reason. Does that make sense? So if we go back to the earliest point at which you considered being self-employed, and you're sitting there in the bank with is that sitting there with the bank manager, was that the first point at which you thought about the risks?
Probably not. Probably when we put together the paperwork before we went to the bank, the projection of when we were talking how much money we would like to receive as an income.
Right.
It kind of, I guess there was a moment there that was like, well, actually that's not a lot of income. That actually, compared to what I was receiving in employment, though I was at home still, and I guess I wanted to. There's things I wanted to do, buy a car. I'd move into the property market, have somewhere to live myself, and so I guess there was money that or the income I was projected to receive as a result of being part of that business was not enough.
So am I right in saying then that you, at the time, you had plans for a car, buy your first house, and employment seemed like the best way for you to get those things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it didn't seem possible through, all there were just two or three things of all the things I wanted to do at that age, holidays, and it all felt very serious.
So that's interesting. So what we've learned then is that actually, rather than this being about fear in itself, fear of change or fear of the unknown or fear of failure or whatever, which would be a simplistic way to look at it, there's actually something more complex going on, which is that in order for him to have the things that he wanted that were important, he felt that employment was a better way of getting those things, and that took him down a particular path. But still we don't know what those things represent. So having a car, you said about being serious, so having a car, having a house, those things represented what to you?
A bit of status involved in that, yeah. A car, because all my mates have got cars, property, shows a bit of maturity and future security, I guess, as well. And that's say.
And status with, in whose eyes do you think?
Peers, friends, family even. Look at Stuart in his shiny blue car and everything. an old man at the time, but it was, driving around showing everybody my new car kind of thing. Yeah.
So so now we're at a point where there's a conflict between that need for status and a need for something else. Because if status was the only thing that was important, then Stuart could say, right now, I'm a manager in this company, and I've got this responsible job, and I've got this team of so many people, and that would be Stuart's introduction. That would be how he describes himself at parties. But he doesn't. He describes himself by talking more about what he wants to do instead, about coaching and about aspirations to running his own business and so on. So there's a connection back to that happened over the years in between is a cycle, a repeating cycle, and therefore the question, what has stopped him from having that up until now, takes us right back to the earliest point at which he made that choice to go in that direction. What do we learn from that?
That where he is right now is the result of a conscious choice that he made in the past.
And therefore it isn't because of something that's outside of his control, like laziness. And what else do we notice from this?
Conflict
Between
between what he wants and where he's going, or where he wants to be.
Okay, what do we go on?
I was just thinking it's to do with approval of other people. But the decision he made such a long time ago was about other people's, what they thought of you, that there was a driving factor.
And expectations on me as well.
Excellent, yeah. So status is, if we just think logically about what status is, how do we define a person's status?
Things.
Well, what they've got.
What they've got in relation to
Others?
other people. So we define status in relation to external benchmarks, other people. What other people have got, or what jobs they do, or what lifestyles they've got, or whatever it might be. But fundamentally, status is defined by comparison to other people. And therefore what that tells us about status is what? In Stuart's example.
It's important too.
It is relative, or
Yes.
relative based on the circumstance that he's putting himself in, because who he's comparing himself to.
Yeah. And so if that's part of Stuart's current decision about becoming self-employed, then what part is status playing now?
If everybody else is employed, it will be different. They have to take different route.
Well, let's ask the question. So in your current decision that's facing you about becoming self-employed, what part does status play in that decision?
I'm with other people who are employed, maybe. I think people are impressed by, you're working towards being employed. I think so. People are interested, encouraging, supportive. I guess I'm receiving some attention from that as well.
They're encouraging you working towards being self-employed?
No, not
or
like,
staying in the...
encouraging me to be doing something that I want to be doing.
Right.
Yeah, not going, you need to do that kind of thing, but
Sure.
well done, Stuart. Yeah.
So which seems like it's the higher status, a job working for a reputable company, or being self-employed?
Job, I guess.
And would you rather be working for Pomeroy or IBM?
You've got a good memory. Pomeroy. And the reason for that is because I'm more recognised in that organisation, because we've been a small organisation, than I would be in a large corporate organisation.
And what happens when you meet somebody at a party and they say, who do you work for? And you say Pomeroy, and they say,
Who?
who?
Oh, you know.
Versus
IBM.
you say you
Yeah.
work IBM.
Yeah. Do a lot of work for IBM.
Ah, right, okay.
So the association is there for a status reason, yeah.
Right. What would you say is the highest status IT company that you can think of?
IBM.
IBM.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel about if you told people that you worked for HP?
It's quite interesting. My auntie described, she'd introduced me to someone the other day. She says, so he's a high up manager in IBM. I didn't deny. She has described me as a managing director of IBM as well. But I was, well, not that quite high kind of thing. Nowhere near that, but yeah.
So what does that tell us about the system?
Just shows the value that he's got around that. So the status and the power and his own associations to what it means to him that holds him on that path.
So in that system, for example, your auntie and I guess other people within the family, if they were to introduce you as working for yourself, what connotation would they attach to that, do you think?
Yeah.
So Stuart, he works for himself.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not so much of a story to tell there, is there, at the moment?
And he works for himself because?
No one employed him.
Yeah. Not because he's a self-starter, not because he's an entrepreneur, but because nobody will give him a job.
Yeah. Well, I feel so much better after that.
Excellent. My work is done. So we have some interesting conflicts going on, and we see the role of the system now. We see the system as creating the sense of status by which Stuart compares and measures himself, and that system attaches more status to working for a recognised company than it does to being self-employed. Now, do you ever go to any small business or entrepreneurs networking events?
I have done.
And how did you feel to be amongst other people who were starting or running their own businesses?
Yeah, sorry, as a coach. Yeah, okay. Very nice, yeah, that I'm there as well. Shoulders back, just like everybody else. A story that I'm
almost creating a story. I notice you're doing this, and I notice you've done this. Whenever you've been uncomfortable and there's something that you've been holding back. So it's nice. And also, was there a sense of incongruence? A sense of you're not quite in the place where they were?
Yeah, I'm not where they are, and almost a bit envious that they are all successful, even though I don't know that. That's how I'm in a room of entrepreneurs. You know, I know that factually might not be true, whatever successful is, but yeah, envious of, well, I want to do that. I want to be that.
And when you're at home with your family and your auntie's introducing you as the managing director of IBM, does the thought cross your mind in that environment that you're envious of people who've got their own businesses?
No. No. I guess when she's doing that, a couple of weeks ago in the corridor and where she lives, and yeah, almost a little bit embarrassed, but we've well, actually, maybe to that person it didn't matter whether I was managing director or owner of IBM. You know, there was an impressiveness. You know, yeah, so just went along with it. You know.
Interesting. So how we got here was recognising that actually the actions, the steps that he'd come up with, if they were that easy to come up with, then he could have done them before. So something has stopped him from doing that before. And asking him what had stopped him from doing that before, he said, you know, laziness, and there was something about the, dependence and having to, you know, security and so on. So, assuming that this isn't the first time he's edged towards this goal of being self-employed, I asked him what was the first time that he thought about that, and it went all the way back to him being 18 or 19 and making the decision then. So that cross-reference meant we could rule out security and having dependence as being the true barrier. Something else was the barrier, and then we discovered from that that it was status. But the starting point was what has stopped him from taking those steps up until now, because if it stopped him up until now, then we can be fairly certain of what?
It'll stop him in the future.
It will continue to stop him. And therefore, as a client in a coaching interaction, he's not going to feel like he's making long-term progress. And as a coach, I'm going to feel what?
Succeeding. You're failure yourself.
Yeah.
If I can't do it, who can?
Yeah, I might feel frustrated that I don't seem to be able to get my clients to take significant, to make significant progress towards the things that I'm supposedly helping them to get. And as a coach on my website, my LinkedIn profile, what am I telling people about myself as a coach? I'm going to help you achieve your goals, I'm going to help you achieve your dreams, I'm going to help you unlock your potential. But the reality is, what am I doing? At that, I'm being an enabler to Stuart staying in the current situation, but at least feeling like he's doing something. And therefore, if I want to help, if as a coach, if I want to help Stuart to get to where he says he wants to be, in order for him to get through that barrier that he's created, what have I got to do as the coach?
Remove the barriers first, because for as long as they're there, they'll be holding him back.
Yeah.
Not necessarily remove it, you can physically remove that barrier, but reframe it and change it.
You've got to make
Turn
him
it into their
recognise that
resource.
he's stopping himself.
Yes. And as soon as we call it a barrier or an obstacle, we're creating something that wasn't there. Normally, you know, if there's an absence of something, we just call it a hole. We don't. We define the hole by what's missing from the material around it. We say, oh, there's a big hole in the fence, and we define it because there's fence around the hole. We don't look at an area of empty space here and say, oh, there's a hole. This is empty space. We don't say there's a hole in the conservatory in the middle of it where we're all sitting. We don't call it a hole because it's has a purpose. We've created this space to sit in. So the very fact that we call it a barrier, now we're putting emphasis on the whole. Perception of barrier is only created by the difference between where we are and where we want to be. So actually there is no barrier. The only thing we can say for certain is the reality that I'm creating in my imagination is not measurably around me now. In other words, I'm not where I want to be. I'm not where I imagine that I would like to be. And that difference creates a perception that something must be stopping me, there must be a barrier, when actually there isn't a barrier. Because if I gave you a pen and a piece of paper, you could sit and write a marketing plan. And so there is nothing stopping Stuart other than the reality that he isn't there yet. And this
We
is
always go backwards when we think we've hit a barrier.
Well, yes, we'll back off.
We go woof and go back.
Yeah,
So
we'll do that
look
edging
again.
like the animal. We'll back off into the the safety of the nest or the cave or whatever. So we'll tend to retreat back to where we've got that sense of security. And actually, security really is about what?
Just being safe, being familiar where you are.
Familiar, yes.
Nature of
So people who've got memory conditions like dementia and Alzheimer's often feel unsafe. Familiarity about where they are. So a recognition of familiarity of the current location. But there's something else about security, and particularly trust as well, is another form of this. Is fundamentally about predicting the future. So I feel secure if I know what's going to happen. So if I've got an expectation about what's going to happen. And what we will do is organise our behaviour in behind those predictions. And then when we are right, we'll convince ourselves that we are good at predicting the future. And we call this confirmation bias. So what we'll do is take a course of action that feels familiar, that feels predictable, and it will turn out how we expect, and we'll convince ourselves that we're right. But the reality is we didn't try any other course of action. So we don't really know if we're right, or if we're just lucky or playing safe. And it's more likely that we're playing safe. We're doing things that we already know will work. So Stuart knows the kind of things that are more likely to increase his sense of status. And he sticks to those things because they give him what he wants. Because having status currently is more important than what do you get from being self-employed.
What do I get from being self-employed? Independent.
So status is more important than independence. And if you think about what those two words mean, they fundamentally reveal this conflict that I'm talking about. Status is about what? Security, other people, place within a group. Independence is about
The removal of that place.
the loss of that, the removal of yourself from that group and that familiarity and that system that you've built. So we're always talking about the conflict fundamentally between the social driver that we have to be part of a group and to conform, and the individual drive that we have to do what we want to do. And if we can find a social group that allows us to do what we want to do, that's nice. But fundamentally, we don't share all of our goals and aspirations with the people around us. Fundamentally, in order for us to get what we as individuals want, it will, at some point, will inevitably mean fighting against the social group or moving away from the social group. And who's ever left a job thinking, oh wow, these people are amazing and they're all my best friends and we're going to keep in touch and so on, and within a fortnight Rachel who? Did she used to work in accounts? Oh no, well, was she the blonde, dark-haired Rachel? So within a very short space of time, the system heals up, it leaves no holes, and it's like you never existed. Because time only exists in our memory. Time doesn't exist in the real world. It exists because we are able to compare memories, compare alternate realities. But in reality, those bricks have only ever been bricks and only ever will be bricks. And we can look, we can dig the ground up and we can find fossils and we can deduce how the fossils got there. But the fossil is what it is now. It has no memory. We know through our experimentations in the physical world that that fossil wasn't always there, that some process formed it, and we can deduce what that is and we can make calculations about how old it is. But fundamentally right now that fossil is what it is and it isn't going to be anything else. But as human beings we can imagine a time when that fossil was a little thing swimming in the sea. But that's because of our ability to hold multiple alternate realities in a map of reality. Just like we can look at a road map of London and the tube map of London and understand that they both represent the same place even though they're very different. And we can create those multiple realities in our mind and act as if any one of those or any number of those is real. What we do with technologies like NLP is we try and reduce the difference between the abstract map and the objective outside world that's shared by other people, so that it's more likely that the behaviours that you predict will actually have the desirable effect in the outside world. Otherwise you get frustrated and disengaged and detached and so on. Or psychotic, to take it to its extreme. So, where do we go with Stuart? How are we doing for time? Good. So, just to recap then, focusing on what has stopped him from taking that simple step up until now, and cross-referencing that with what was the earliest point in time at which he wanted to do this thing, that he had this goal in mind, and do his current excuses match up with his situation at the earliest point at which he wanted to do that? And the answer was no, and therefore the real reason must be something else. And then what we got to was status. So thank you, Stuart. So pair up again with the same person and find that out. Find out what's the reason that they haven't taken these simple steps up until now. What was the earliest point at which they first thought about wanting this thing? And at that earliest point, what do they think caused them to make the choice that they did? So in Stuart's case, what made him make the choice to stay in employment rather than join his friend in the web design business? And once you've done that, we'll take a tea break.
Can you just repeat the last one?
The
earliest point bit.
So the simple step, what stopped them from doing that until now? What was the earliest point at which they first thought about wanting whatever it is they want, and what was it that caused them to make the choice that they did at that time? What were they looking for? What were they hoping that choice would give them more of? Something like that. And we've talked, some of you have talked a little bit about, being at cause or taking responsibility or that sort of stuff. But actually, if we focus them back on that first choice, all of that's taken care of. We don't have to get them to take responsibility, and we don't have to get them to think about a barrier, because if we go back to that earliest point and they realise that was a choice that they made, an informed choice that they made, then it wasn't out of their hands and it wasn't an accident. And therefore everything that has followed since has been a consequence of that choice, and therefore has given them something that they wanted. Not everything, but something that they wanted. So we're going to find out what it was that drove that first choice that they made. Make sense?
Yeah, but would there always be an earlier point where they had this decision?
I would say yes, because if somebody's sitting there having a coaching conversation with you, that's unlikely to be the first time that they've thought about what they want. So even if they only thought about it for the first time a week ago, there was still a previous point at which they thought about what they wanted and didn't act.
Yeah.
Or acted to take them in a different direction. And also, like the fossil in the ground, it's only ever now. So we're only having this conversation now. And we're bringing this to a focus because we're talking about it now. And actually, we could have had this conversation at any point in your life. So at any point between now and when you first had that idea of what you wanted to do, at any point in time we could have talked about how what you were doing was not what you wanted to be doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we could have taken a snapshot at any point in your life and had the same conversation. So in that regard, there's nothing that makes this moment special. It isn't that you've come to a point where you finally decided you're going to do something about it. You finally decided you're going to enroll in a coaching course and you're going to do an NLP course and you come on this masterclass. Because actually, there's lots of things that you've done over the years. So for example, your sports coaching that you do and so on. So there's loads of stuff that you've done over the years, that we've all done over the years, that keeps us in that state of conflict between what we want that gives us the feeling of comfort and what we want that gives us the feeling of whatever, freedom, creativity, breaking free, doing something different, following our own path, whatever. So our life has been a constant interweaving of those two conflicting goals. Is that a bad thing?
No, it is not. I think that we often perceive it as a limit, but actually it's a resource, it's a driving force for what we do. And if we can reframe then what we think limits us into a resource and finding how exactly does it drive us, then that's
Yes.
when it can be used to achieve our goals rather than seeing it as a barrier that's limiting.
And that's
The
a
question, do you always know that you want something else? I don't believe you do. Sometimes I think what your life in general and things that can happen to you can create new openings, can create visions of things that maybe you've never had or never known you want.
Mhm.
You know, it's not a case of all.
And then the external inspiration comes along and you think, I didn't even know I could have that.
Said, the external inspiration suddenly says to you, I could have had some of that.
Yeah. Because
But
there was a
then you say,
time.
to have that though, I might have to give this up.
Right.
So then you've got a conflict, haven't you?
So when I left school and started work, there was a time that I didn't know that it was possible to be self-employed. I didn't even know such a thing existed. I didn't know what the different structures of companies were. I just thought there are companies, because my dad worked for companies, and there are companies, and you go and work for a company, you have a job, and everybody there has a job. And it never occurred to me how those things are structured and organised and who starts them and who runs them. I never questioned that. So it wasn't until much later in life that I even realised there was such a thing as being self-employed. And I didn't really become aware of that until I became aware that I didn't want to be employed. And I suppose then I started to think about, well, what are the alternatives? So there has to be some external inspiration at some point, because there's a time when we don't know that these things exist. So there's a time as kids where we're quite happy to eat fish fingers, but we don't know that there are fishing boats or fish finger production factories in wherever they are, and lorries that, you know, we know that there are lorries, but we don't know what they do. We don't question any of this. We don't question how it got there. We see the conservatory, we don't question how it got there. We don't think about what are the technical skills required to build one of these things. Could I do it? Because that's not on the radar. It's not something that's not a choice that's presented to us.
But you have to eat the fish fingers in the first place
Yes.
to start to learn there are more things than fish fingers.
Yes.
And you get the taste, think, oh, that tastes good, and then you say, oh.
And most people don't ever get beyond, where do fish fingers come from? Tesco's. That's all I need to know. Don't need to look any further into it than that, because I've got no intention of going fishing and making my own fish fingers. It's only until I want to bring that into my scope of control that I start to want to know how to make stuff. So as soon as I'm quite happy to go and buy bread from the supermarket, but what if there comes a time when you become aware that people make their own bread? They don't just buy it from Tesco's. Then, well, how do they do that? Anybody started doing something like that, making your own bread or making your own anything that previously you would not think twice about buying? And you've taken that inspiration, you become aware that this is something that it is possible to do for yourself, and by trial and error you've acquired the skills to do it. Would that be fair?
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's whatever it is, making stuff, fixing stuff, I don't know, cooking, DIY, car maintenance. There's all kinds of things that we're quite happy to let other people do for us, up until the point that we think, oh, this is something I could do for myself. And then we get a certain pleasure from that, from doing something just for ourselves. It almost doesn't really matter what it is.
Designing a website.
Designing your own website. What else? What other kind of things have you internalised, have you mastered doing yourself that previously you were quite happy to let somebody else do for you?
Making waffles recently.
Making waffles?
For the
Excellent.
diner.
Yeah,
And hummus.
excellent.
Husband said it was awful.
Yeah. Trial and error.
Making greetings cards. Actually,
Yeah,
producing them.
yeah, yeah. And there's been a big boom since the recession in these sort of DIY kits, haven't there, and shops like Hobbycraft that have given people the means to do stuff for themselves that they previously would have bought, and they've ended up with Hobbycraft spending 10 times as much as if they'd have just bought it. But they've got the pleasure of knowing.
That's
Like
the problem.
making soap and candles. And
Yes,
that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Made their own candles. They bought a blank greetings card, put a sticker on the front of it, and had the pleasure of knowing that they made it themselves at 10 times the price. And they're able, you know, it's something like that, they're able to share it with other people. You're able to share your hummus and your waffles with other people. And say, I did that, I made that. Or maybe pretend that you bought it from... Yeah, I had this from the co-op, it's terrible, I'm never buying it from there again. So we exist in this permanent state of conflict between staying where we are and taking a step somewhere different. And actually in when we design self-correcting electrical and mechanical systems, we call this permanent state of conflict homeostasis. Another word for that is balance. So when you set the cruise control in your car, and it will adjust the power that it's requesting from the engine according to whether you're going uphill, downhill, whatever other conditions are acting upon the car, to maintain a constant speed. So it'll make all of these calculations and adjustments to maintain the constant speed, like your central heating at home will make adjustments in order to maintain a roughly constant temperature. But actually, if we were to measure the temperature of the room or the speed of the car very accurately, we would see it's never at rest. It's never exactly the speed you set it at. It's always going a bit faster or a bit slower, a bit faster, a bit slower. And that constant movement around the target is homeostasis. So the car is almost never at, let's say you set the cruise control at 70 miles an hour, the car is never actually doing 70 miles an hour, but it's doing something between 70.5 and 69.5. So if we measure over a long period of time, the average is 70, but at any moment in time it's never doing 70. If we set the thermostat on the air conditioning to 21, the temperature of the room is never 21. Because for a start it's warmer by the ceiling than it is by the floor, and the air is in constant circulation. We've got our own weather pattern in a room where we're putting a heat source in, and then heat is leaving the room through an open window or through poor insulation. We've got constant movement. So the system is never at rest. And so us as a system, we are never at rest. We're always in a state of homeostasis, always in a state of conflict between staying where we are and taking a step towards where we want to be. That being said, if we accept for a moment that is at least metaphorically true of us as a human system, then what does the role of the coach become?
The governor.
Do we set the measures?
Yeah, the governor.
Yeah. Slow down, speed up. Slow down, speed
Yeah, and therefore, yes. And that governor, which is what steam engines have, which if you go to a science museum, you'll see this wonderful thing, a contraption that regulates the speed of a steam or an old engine, and it's basically two big balls on a spring-loaded arm. And the faster the thing spins, the more these balls move out. And they reach the point where they can't move out any further. And the force required to turn them slows the engine down. And as they slow down, it comes down and it speeds up again. And this is a beautifully simple mechanical device that regulates the speed of an engine. And you'll see this if you go to like an old, country fair and you see the old steam traction engines. You'll see one of these things spinning around on them. They're beautiful in their simplicity of their design, using our knowledge of physical forces to regulate something. But the role of the governor is to provide what?
Guidance. It's a balance.
Guidance. Balance will be the end result. But to provide guidance, another word for guidance?
Direction.
Yeah. Another word for specific to the role. We can think about it in terms of the role of the coach. Is to provide feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that these systems maintain balance is through a feedback loop. So the system will take some action, so the cruise control will apply power to the engine, or will signal the engine to say give me more power, and the car will speed up. But why doesn't the car carry on getting faster and faster and faster?
Because it's receiving data input to say that, to adjust.
Yeah.
You're now going too fast, therefore you need to go slower. And then
Exactly.
too slower, you go faster.
So now the system's receiving data that allows it to correct. And the data isn't saying you're going too fast or your speed is 71 miles an hour or whatever. The data is simply saying on or off. It's saying do more power or less power. And using very, very simple crude components, we can build self-correcting systems that achieve immense accuracy, because they're always in a state of balance. And the more accurate or the more timely, the faster the feedback comes, the faster the system can react to changes. And we then end up with a system that's self-correcting within a very narrow range of conditions. And it looks like the system is maintaining a constant balance, but it actually isn't. So,
like, tote,
yes, exactly.
test, operate, test, evaluate.
That's it, exactly it. In the way that neurons are connected up, yeah, in the brain, yes, exactly. So we know when to turn something on and we know when to turn it off. And if we've got an efficient feedback mechanism, then we'll maintain a constant operation under varying external conditions. Now, if the signal back to the cruise control computer could only detect a change in speed of 10 miles an hour, then your speed will be something between 60 and 80 and it wouldn't know. Now, we could still say the average over time would be 70. So the system is still doing its job, but the car would be constantly accelerating and decelerating between 60 and 80 miles an hour. From a design point of view, that system is maintaining the speed at 70, so it's working perfectly. But is that a good experience for the user?
No.
So yeah, constantly speeding up and slowing down. Yeah. So we want that difference to be as small as possible. And so in that metaphor, what is the role of the coach?
Regulate.
To regulate by?
So it's stopping somebody going through the same loop to cut. Is it like your servo system when you know the heating cuts in or it cuts out depending on when a certain temperature is reached?
Yeah.
So it's a bit like that when somebody keeps repeating the same pattern is to stop that from happening.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is we're talking about the client going around in circles, we're talking about repeating cycles or patterns or loops in life. But if we just stop and look at the reality of the situation, the fact is that you are no longer in a mundane office job. You actually are making money as an artist and all the other stuff that you do. The reality is that you are coaching people, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Are they paying you for it?
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is you actually have moved on. You haven't exactly gone in a circle. You've gone in circles and moved forward. So something that goes in circles and moves forward is like a helix or a spring. And so the circle, now we might see the circle not as being a problem. Oh, here I am again, I've gone around in circles again. I've had another opportunity to be self-employed and I've turned it down. But actually in that circling, you are moving forwards as well. So now that circling motion isn't a problem, it's now what?
Solution.
Well, yes.
Feedback.
It's a feedback loop. It's creating energy that moves us forwards. And it's very easy for us as coaches to say, oh my God, the client's going around in circles, that's a bad thing. But actually that's a matter of perception. Here we are again. And we're not here again, because we can't ever be here again, because there is only now.
Is it creating momentum then when you say create energy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, even if you hit the barrier and you bounce back, you don't bounce back to the same place.
Exactly.
You go
Exactly.
a bit advanced from where you were previously.
Exactly. So if it ever feels like you've gone in circles, another way of looking at that is how have you measurably moved forward? So when was the first point that you thought you might take up coaching as a future career?
About 3 years ago.
About 3 years ago. Have you not moved forward at all in those 3 years?
Of course I have. Yeah.
You have.
Mm.
And what would you say are the significant steps forward that you've taken in those 3 years?
The training, the qualification, the coaching clients themselves, being part of coaching community groups, surrounding myself with coaching friends. Yeah, NLP, being here.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done quite a bit of.
So whether we've gone in circles or moved forwards, both are true at the same time. If we look at a helical path of anything, we can see that it goes in circles and we can see that it moves forwards, depending on the angle from which we're looking at it. Does that make sense? If we look at a spring from the side, we can see it zigzags forwards. If we look at a spring down the end, it looks like it goes around in circles. Both are true.
So it's all perceptional. So it's the client's. So is that what you're saying? The coach's role is to enable the client to see things from see things like achievements or things how they've progressed by feeding that back to them and enabling them to see that from my point of view as okay, look, you're making fantastic progress here. You've done this, you've achieved this,
and they will say, and if you put it like that, they will likely say,
I might as well stop.
well, they'll likely say, yeah, but.
Yeah, but yeah.
Because what you're saying is, this is what I can see.
Yeah.
They don't care about what you can see.
Uh-huh.
And yet, the feedback mechanism in, for example, the cruise control in the car, the feedback mechanism is telling the computer something that it doesn't know. It's giving the computer some information that it doesn't have by itself.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore the role of the coach is to do what?
Allow them to see it.
Tell them something they don't know.
Yes.
Facilitate their own feedback mechanism and kind of put some of these regulatory systems in place to give them data that they know what kind of action to take.
Well, certainly to provide feedback. We're part of an external feedback loop. We're going to provide the client with information that they don't have access to, which then enables them to do what?
Make a choice.
Yes.
Decide the next step.
Yeah. And to self-correct. So the feedback that we provide enables the client to self-correct. And that feedback can take many forms. It can take clever coaching questions, it can take direct feedback, So you might look at some communication that the client's presenting to you or to other people, and you might say, well, this is how this comes across to me, and they might say, well, that's not what I intended. It doesn't matter what you intended, I'm telling you how it comes across to me. You might be very direct in the feedback. You might say, this is how I see it. You might be asking, as I say, clever questions to get them to become more aware of feedback. One of the simplest forms of feedback is look around you. The world and the system that you've created around you provides you with feedback. So Stuart, as you look in the world around you, what signs do you see, or what things do you see that you've created in the world that support the direction that you want to move in?
Yeah, by the fact that people who I surround myself with, people who I engage with,
So what would be a physical thing if you went home and you looked around your house? Tell me something physically that you would see that is a sign of the direction that you're wanting to move in.
Books.
Books. Okay.
Unread books.
Unread books. But nonetheless, books. You took action to get those books. And so we start to create a physical world as part of that system, that support system, that moves us forwards. But of course, in the physical world, there is also, like the fossils, a record of the past. There's a record of everything that we've done up until this point. And everything that we've done up until this point had a choice behind it. And therefore, as we look around the system, we see things that are a sign of the direction we want to move in, but we also see what?
Where we've been.
Where we've been. And where we are. And from where we've been, what implications does that carry? The things that we see that tell us where we've been, what are the implications of those?
The basis of comparison.
Yeah.
Look how far we've moved away,
Yes.
or towards what we want to achieve.
So you use the word dependencies, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So in the things that have been before, we see dependencies. We see things that need to be maintained, statuses that have to be maintained, relationships that have to be maintained. So if you think about your normal daily environment, if you imagine looking around your normal daily environment, you can see physical things that you've created, that you've placed there, that symbolise where you want to move towards, yes? And you can also see things that symbolise where you've come from. And some effort goes into maintaining those. So you might see old books, you might see books about IT, for example, on your shelf. Books about web design, for example. So we're also wanting to tell people this story about where we've come from. In order to explain how we are where we are now. Now, when my mother was alive, she had a bit of dementia towards the end of her life. And if I came in and put something down on the table, like a vase or a mug, or bought her a clock once, and it's something that she hadn't seen before, she would very quickly forget that she'd seen it, and then she'd see it again as if for the first time, and then again as if for the first time. And each time she would ask the same question: where did it come from? And she would answer that question herself by making up a story about how it got there. And it was a different story each time, but she didn't remember that. So in every moment she was recreating her reality and creating a story to explain how that reality had come to pass. Because we don't like it.
The synapses or something.
Yeah, well, she's not forming short-term memories.
Pick the one bit and join the other bit up. The path is missing, isn't it? Or destroyed.
So we like to have this certainty in our surroundings and a story about how things came to be. Because if you got home and everything had changed, you would feel what?
Disorientated and lost.
Yeah.
Confused.
And unsafe as well.
Unsafe.
Is that safety.
Exactly.
Great.
So something suddenly appears in your home that wasn't there yesterday, You're confused, you want to know the story, where did it come from, who put that there? We want to know the story because we want to create this imaginary path that led to where we are now. Because if we're certain about the story that led us to where we are now, then what?
Sorry, say that again.
If we're certain about the story that led us to where we are now, then what?
Then you can be certain of the path that you're about to take.
Yeah. We can feel safe because we can predict the future. So the things that we surround ourselves with and the people we surround ourselves with become part of the story that we tell that explains why we are where we are now and why we're not somewhere that we're saying we want to be but we're not. So we tell a story about, oh well, you see, it's very interesting because I mean at the moment I'm on this, but what I really want to do is this, and I'm you know, who wants to hear that? But you're answering a question that nobody asked, which is, why are you not doing the thing that you say repeatedly that you want to do? So if somebody at a party says to you, what do you do for a living? What do you say?
Yeah. I'm an IT manager and a coach.
Yeah. And actually what you said to Mick this morning was, oh well, you said, I've got this regular, it's not, I've got a 5-day-a-week job
Yeah, I know
as an
exactly
IT
what I said,
manager.
yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, yeah, 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, coach, yeah. IT manager.
so what is it that stops you from saying I'm a coach? Is probably the incongruence that you feel because you know that in the story of your life that's not the whole truth.
Mm-hmm.
But when do we ever tell the people the whole truth about what we do? If you go to a party and somebody, what do you do? Well, take the bins out every Thursday. Mostly watch telly. We don't tell people stuff like that. We tell them what we want them to know about us. And so when you start working with a client, the first things that they will tell you is the story that explains why they are where they are now. And within that are some clues about how they're going to get to where they want to be.